The school bus doors flew open and Mona stepped out onto the pavement, her sneakers hitting the ground just like everybody else's. She pulled her bag onto her shoulder, looked up at the big iron gates of Westbrook Academy, and walked right in. Nobody held the door for her. Nobody even looked at her. And that was fine. Mona liked it that way. Westbrook Academy was the most famous school in the whole city. It sat on top of a hill like it owned the sky. The hallways were full of kids who wore the latest shoes and talked loudly about the trips their parents took to Paris and Dubai. There were students who came to school in long black cars with tinted windows and drivers who wore uniforms. And then there was Mona, 19 years old, quiet, arriving every morning on the public bus. Her classmates had decided very quickly what kind of person she was. She must be here on some kind of sponsorship, one girl named Yura whispered one day, watching Mona sit down at the back of class. No normal person takes the public bus to Westbrook. The other girls giggled. Mona heard them. She opened her notebook and said nothing. The truth? At home, Mona had a closet bigger than most people's living rooms. Her father, Mr. Song, owned 14 companies across 3 countries. There was a driver waiting every night to pick her up from the bus stop, but Mona always waved him away and walked. She didn't like being treated like a princess. She liked being just a girl. Red Heart, if you're already loving this story, smash that like button right now and drop in the comments. Where are you watching from? We love seeing your locations. Globe showing Europe, Africa. It was on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into the school term, that Mona first noticed him. She was walking through the long corridor that connected the science block to the main hall, a wide passage with tall windows that looked out onto the highway road, when she saw a boy standing by the window. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was just standing there, staring out at the street below like he was thinking about something very far away. He was tall, Korean, maybe 22 years old, with a calm face and a worn backpack hanging from one shoulder. His uniform was pressed, but not new. His shoes were clean, but not expensive. There was something about the way he stood, very still, very quiet, that made Mona stop walking. She had seen him around before, always near the classroom next door to hers, always alone. She had heard someone say his name once, Kelvin. She had heard someone else say he got into Westbrook on an academic award, that the school paid for him because his test scores were some of the highest in the country. Some people thought that was impressive. Others just used it as a reason to look down on him. Mona walked over. Simple as that. Hey, she said. Kelvin turned. He looked surprised, like he hadn't expected anyone to talk to him. Hey, he said back. You're always standing here, Mona said, looking out the window with him. What are you looking at? He was quiet for a second. Then he said, the bus. I'm watching to make sure I know what time the next one comes. Mona almost smiled. Me too, she said. And just like that, they started talking. They talked every morning after that. Mona learned that Kelvin was studying engineering. He was brilliant. He could explain complicated things in simple words, which she found rare and beautiful. He had grown up in a small house with his mother and father, both of them hard workers who had given everything so he could study. He had never been on a plane. He had never left the city, not even for a weekend trip to the mountains. You've really never left the city? Mona asked one afternoon. They were sitting on the low wall outside the school canteen, sharing a pack of crackers. Never, Kelvin said, looking a little embarrassed. There was always something: exam, work, money. You know how it goes. Mona looked at him for a long moment. Would you want to? If you could. Of course, he said. And then he laughed quietly. But wanting something and being able to do it are two very different things. Mona nodded slowly. She didn't say anything else about it. Not yet. By the end of that month, everyone at Westbrook knew that Mona and Kelvin talked every day. They walked to the bus stop together. They called each other at night. And slowly, something warm and quiet began to grow between them, the kind of feeling that sneaks up on you before you even notice it's there. Some students talked about it. Why is she spending time with him? He came here on a scholarship, Yura said, loud enough for people to hear. She could be friends with anyone. Others watched with something closer to admiration. I think it's sweet, said a boy named Day from the class next door. He's smart and she's kind. What's wrong with that? Mona and Kelvin paid zero attention to any of it. One evening, Kelvin called her after dinner. I've been thinking, he said. About what? She asked. About why you talk to me, he said honestly. Most people here don't. And you just walked up to me that day like it was nothing. It was nothing, she said. You looked like you needed a friend. And now, he asked. She smiled into the phone. Now you're more than that. And you know it. There was a long pause. Then Kelvin said quietly, yeah, I know it. You're about 3 minutes in, and trust me, this story is just getting started. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now so you never miss a new episode. And tell us in the comments, are you Team Mona or Team Kelvin? A few weeks later, Mona did something that surprised even herself. She bought 2 plane tickets, booked a hotel, and planned a 4-day trip to Jeju Island, just for them. She told Kelvin it was a birthday trip, even though his birthday was 2 months away. He didn't question it. He had never been on a plane and was too excited to care about the timing. At the airport, Kelvin stood at the departure gate with wide eyes, turning his head slowly to take in everything. This is real, he kept saying. This is actually real. Mona laughed. Yes, Kelvin. Planes are real. You're about to get on one. Stop teasing me, he said, but he was grinning ear to ear. On that trip, they saw green mountains and blue water and ate good food by the sea. They talked about their dreams, his desire to one day build something that would change people's lives, her hope to run a business of her own. They laughed until their stomachs hurt. On the last evening, sitting on the beach as the sun went down, Kelvin turned to her and said, Mona, I want to be honest with you. Okay, she said. I don't have much. I know that. My family is not wealthy. I got into that school by working harder than I have ever worked in my life. And I can't give you the things that some other people can. Mona looked at him steadily. Did I ever ask you for anything? No, he admitted. Then stop apologizing for what you don't have, she said gently. I like who you are, Kelvin. Not what you own. He looked at her for a long time. The waves came in quietly. The sky turned gold. And without another word, he reached over and held her hand. It was around that time that Mona decided to bring Kelvin home. She had thought about it carefully. She knew what home looked like, the large gate, the wide driveway, the house that looked more like a hotel than a place where people lived. She had always kept that world separate from school. But Kelvin was different. He was someone she trusted completely. Come for dinner on Saturday, she told him. Your place, he asked. Yes, he agreed without knowing what he was walking into. On Saturday evening, the driver picked Kelvin up from his house and took him across the city. Kelvin sat in the back of the car, watching the neighborhoods change from small streets and corner shops to wide roads and tall trees and houses with walls you couldn't see over. When the car turned into the Song family driveway and the gate opened, Kelvin went very, very quiet. The house was enormous. There were flowers along every path. Soft lights lit up the garden. A fountain stood in the middle of the courtyard like something from a movie. Mona, he said slowly when she met him at the door. What is this? This is home, she said simply and pulled him inside. Mr. Song was a large man with a warm handshake and kind eyes. Mrs. Song had a smile that made you feel instantly at ease. They welcomed Kelvin in, sat him down at the dinner table, and talked with him for 3 hours about everything: school, life, his parents, his ambitions. They laughed together. They asked real questions and listened to real answers. At the end of the evening, as Kelvin was leaving, Mr. Song placed a hand on his shoulder and said, You're a good young man, Kelvin. A very good one. Speech balloon, we're right at the middle, and it's about to get even more emotional. Drop a fire in the comments if you're still here, and where are you watching from? Subscribe if you haven't. You don't want to miss the ending. In the car ride home, Kelvin sat quietly, his mind turning over everything he had seen and heard. He called Mona as soon as he got through his front door. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. His voice was not angry, just very, very surprised. Tell you what, Mona said. Mona, your father. Your house. All of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Would you have talked to me the same way if you knew? At that window in school, would you have been comfortable? Or would you have been nervous and careful and weird about it? Kelvin thought about that honestly. Probably weird about it, he admitted. Exactly, she said. I wanted you to know me first. Just me. He let out a long breath. Mona Song, he said slowly, you're something else. She laughed. I know. A month later, Westbrook Academy sent out invitations for the annual parents' meeting and charity gala. Every family was expected to attend. There would be donations collected for the school's student support fund and other programs. It was a big event, suits and gowns, long tables, speeches. Mona and Kelvin attended together as students. They sat near the back and watched as parent after parent stood up to announce donations. 3 million. 5 million. 2 million. The room applauded each time. Kelvin's parents were not there. They had not received an invitation, as Kelvin had come in on an academic award, not a family enrollment. He watched quietly, without expression. Then Mr. Song stood up. The room didn't know him at first. He was not flashy. He wore a simple dark suit. He stood up calmly, cleared his throat, and said in a clear voice, "Good evening. My name is Song Hyun-jae. My daughter Mona is a student here." He paused. I would like to make a donation today. Another pause. 1 billion won to the Student Support Fund. And further to that, I will personally provide every single student in this school with a brand new laptop, delivered before the end of term. The room went absolutely silent. Then someone gasped. Then the whole room erupted. People turned to each other with open mouths. Teachers sat up straight. The headmaster nearly knocked over his water glass. Parents who had just donated 5 million were suddenly very quiet, staring at their plates. In the back of the room, Kelvin turned to Mona with huge eyes. "Mona," he whispered. "Yes," she whispered back, completely calm. "Your father just..." "Yes." 1 billion. "Yes." "And he came in a normal car." "He usually does," she said. Kelvin stared at her. And then he started laughing quietly into his hand, until his whole body was shaking with it. Mona joined him, pressing her face against his shoulder so no one could see. They laughed together in the back of that very serious room, and it was the best moment of the whole night. The next morning at school was something else entirely. People who had never once spoken to Mona were suddenly very interested in being her friend. Yura was the first to appear at her desk with a big smile. "Mona, I didn't realize, we should really get to know each other better. We've been in the same class for 3 months, Mona said, not rudely, but clearly. You know where to find me." And she went back to her book. Kelvin watched from the doorway and grinned. She hadn't changed a single thing about herself. Not one thing. People also began to look at Kelvin differently. Some tried to be friendly in that fake, sudden way that made both of them uncomfortable. Others, genuinely, seemed to admire the relationship more. "She's a trillion-worth daughter, and she's dating a scholarship student," someone said in the hallway. "And she went on that trip with him. And she holds his hand in public. That's actually kind of amazing." "She's dating him because he's good," Day said firmly from the other side of the hallway. "Some of you really need to think about what you value." Eyes were almost at the 5-minute mark, and I promise you, the most emotional part is still coming. Like this video if it's giving you all the feels, and comment your country below. We see every single one. Globe showing Americas. That evening, Mona sat down with her father. "Daddy," she said, "I need to talk to you about Kelvin." Mr. Song set down his newspaper and looked at his daughter. He had known this conversation was coming. He had seen it in her eyes at dinner the night Kelvin visited. He had watched the way she looked at that young man, steady and sure, the way you look at something you're not giving up. "Talk," he said. "I love him," Mona said. Simple. Direct. He is kind and honest, and he works harder than anyone I have ever met. He comes from a family that doesn't have much money, but they have everything that matters. And I want to be with him. Mr. Song was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Tell me about his family." So Mona told him everything: the small house, the hardworking parents, the way Kelvin's mother had ironed his uniform every morning since he was 5 years old, the way his father had taken extra jobs to pay for his prep courses before the scholarship exam. She told her father all of it. Mr. Song listened without interrupting. When she finished, he folded his hands on his lap and said slowly, "A man who comes from love and hard work is worth more than a man who comes from money and laziness." He looked at Mona. "You chose well, my daughter." Mona felt something release in her chest, a tension she hadn't even realized she was holding. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. "But," he added, lifting one finger, "I want to meet his parents. Properly." 2 weeks later, Mr. and Mrs. Song drove to the other side of the city and knocked on the door of a small, neat house on a quiet street. Kelvin's mother opened the door and nearly fainted when she saw who was standing on her step. She had cleaned the house 4 times that morning. She had cooked for 2 days. She stood at the door in her best dress with shaking hands. "Please," said Mrs. Song warmly, taking her hands, "don't be nervous. We are just parents, same as you." They sat together at the small table in Kelvin's family home and ate the most delicious meal anyone had tasted in a long time. They talked, they laughed, they shared stories. Kelvin's father spoke about his son with such pride that Mr. Song felt it deep in his chest. Before leaving that evening, Mr. Song pulled Kelvin's father aside. He spoke quietly and carefully. He said that he had found a house, a proper house, in a good neighborhood, and that he would like to give it to Kelvin's family as a gift. Not as charity, as family. Kelvin's father stared at him. He opened his mouth, closed it. His eyes went red. "You don't have to do this," he finally managed. "I know," said Mr. Song. "That is exactly why I'm doing it." When Kelvin's mother heard, she sat down at the kitchen table and covered her face with her hands and cried the kind of tears that carry years of hard work and quiet sacrifice and relief all at once. Kelvin stood beside her and held her shoulders, and he cried too, quietly, the way men sometimes do when they think nobody is looking. Mona was in the doorway. She saw everything. She pressed a hand to her chest and said nothing at all. They graduated. They worked. They grew. Kelvin finished his engineering degree and went on to build systems that thousands of people used every single day. Mona launched a business of her own, not under her father's name, not with his money. On her own, because she wanted to know she could. And 3 years after that Tuesday morning in the corridor by the highway window, Kelvin got down on one knee in the same spot, the same long corridor, same tall windows, and held up a ring. "This is where it started," he said. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking just a little. "You walked up to me when nobody else did. You saw me when I felt invisible. You showed me the world, Mona. And I want to spend the rest of my life showing you what that meant to me." Mona looked at him for a long moment. The morning light came through the windows. Somewhere down the hall, a bell rang. "Yes," she said. 100 times yes. He slid the ring on her finger, stood up, and held her close right there in the middle of that corridor, not caring at all who saw. Their wedding was everything people expected of a Song family event, beautiful, generous, and full of real love. Both families sat at the front together, for people who had come from very different worlds, now sharing the same table, the same laughter, the same tears of joy. At the reception, Kelvin's mother danced with Mr. Song and laughed so hard she had to hold onto his arm. Kelvin's father sat beside Mrs. Song, and they talked quietly about how strange and wonderful life could be. Mona and Kelvin danced in the center of it all, looking at each other the way they had always looked at each other, like the other person was the most interesting thing in the room. Years passed the way good years do, quickly, warmly, full of noise and motion. They had 2 children, a girl they named Sarah, who had Kelvin's calm eyes and Mona's bold spirit, and a boy they named June, who came into the world already loud and curious and deeply loved. On Sunday mornings, all 4 grandparents came to the house. Mr. Song would sit on the floor and let Sarah climb all over him. Kelvin's mother would cook, always too much food, always perfect. The house was full of talking and laughing and the sound of small feet running across wooden floors. Kelvin would sometimes stand by the kitchen window and watch it all, his children, his wife, their parents, this life, and feel something so full it almost hurt. Mona would appear beside him, always knowing when he was thinking deeply, and lean her head against his shoulder. Still surprised, she'd ask. Every single day, he'd say. And she would smile. The same smile from that first Tuesday morning when she walked up to a quiet boy standing by a window and decided that he was worth knowing. The bus had brought them both to the same place. And love, real love, the kind that doesn't care about money or status or what other people think, had brought them home. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We release new love stories every week. Speech Balloon, drop a comment and tell us, where are you watching from? And which part of Mona and Kelvin's story hit you the hardest? Share this story with someone who believes in real love. Globe showing Europe, Africa. Bell subscribe. Don't miss the next story.